8 to 10 a.m. and you're listening to
Okay, before we get to the champion spotting feature, let me tell you about Sentio. So Sentio Capital, they invest for good philosophies based on a genuine desire to use their investment skills for the benefit of broader society while also delivering superior returns for clients, regardless of market conditions. Now, visit their website, sentiocapital.com, for more information on their Sharia investment products in particular. Sentio Capital, invest for good. Sentio Capital Management is an authorized financial services provider. Okay, let's talk champion spotting. So let me tell you the story. Champion spotting is a feature that is completely linked to the Champion South Africa project that I drive. My goal, or our goal at Champion South Africa, is to build South Africa into a champion nation. It means everything must tick and everything must work in our country. Part of that is our motto, our ethos, which is we build the champions that build the champion nation. It means I have to spend lots of time spotting champions, and therefore we do champion spotting. So it could be people, it could be organizations, it could be somebody doing outstanding work or championing great causes. And we think, or I certainly think, that the work of Ground Up in particular, and two people from Ground Up, journalists, Marecia Damons and Daniel Steyn, is exactly the type of champions we need in our country, multiplied across the length and breadth of the country. If those names are not that familiar to you at this point in time, if I mention Thabo Bester, you'll know exactly why it should be familiar to you, because the reason we're talking Thabo Bester is particularly because we're talking to the team from Ground Up, and in this case, Marecia Damons and Daniel Steyn. So I've got them both with us, Marecia and Daniel, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning.
Morning, and thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure. Well, I wanted to because we wanted to highlight the fantastic work that you do, right? Marecia, let me maybe start with you here, right? So, because I know Daniel joined you guys on this project later on, but I'm going to start with the end point right now, okay? As we now talk, and the purpose is not to talk about the actual crime story. I mean, they can go to Ground Up and read it. I mean, I'm going to encourage them to do that, right? But as we daily find out more and more about what's happened with Thabo Bester and Nandipa, what do you think when you're sitting at home or you're sitting at work and you have a moment to yourself? What are you thinking?
So I think if we go back to how the story started out, looking back at the very first article that Ground Up published, we actually had a list of 5 possible outcomes or explanations for why there were suspicious circumstances surrounding the fire that broke out in the cell where Thabo Bester was kept. And the least likely outcome was that he had escaped, and that was last year in November. So to just see the progress and how things have developed and changed in a matter of a few months has been as shocking for me as the journalist, as well as in the same way that it's been for the South African public. Yeah.
So interesting. You said that was the least likely, the least believable, the least likely scenario. The others were far more likely. And yet you put down 5 scenarios. So we know that's happened to be true now. The least likely has happened to be the most likely. It's bizarre, right? How did you get to write that initial story then? What happened to you? I mean, you could have written about something else. And you do a lot of things around human rights. I know that. Why did you pick up on that story? What happened?
So we initially received information towards the end of October, just asking us to take a closer look into the fire that had broken out in Thabo Bester's cell. And when he was initially convicted just over a decade ago, that received a lot of media attention. And his supposed death in May last year also received a lot of media attention. So we were initially skeptical of taking on the story, but there were several questions that needed to be answered by the authorities nonetheless. So that is why we decided to still take on the story, despite still being somewhat skeptical about it.
It sounded rather farcical. Okay, so having done that then, right, I'm going to fast forward to now, specifically with you, Marecia, when you now sit on your own and you reflect in your office or at home, and you see the conversations on a national and international scale around the Thabo Bester story, and obviously Ground Up being quoted. What do you think? Like, what do you tell yourself?
It's interesting to see that it has taken quite a life of its own. I do think that what I've noticed is a lot of the public has somewhat sensationalized the story, but we do still need to remember that this is a dangerous man. I mean, he is a convicted rapist and a convicted murderer at the end of the day. And even though the story seems to be so far-fetched and something out of a movie, we do still need to bear in mind the seriousness of it.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Yeah, but you're also not, and I'm going to push you on this one. You're not answering the mental part of you directly. And I want to get, because I'm trying to understand your mind. Okay, so I mean, like, are you like sitting there? It's like, can you believe what we've done? Like, look at what we've done. Look at the impact we've made. From the ground up, we've literally broken the edifice of not just the Thabo Bester story, but certainly of a correctional service. And there's so many questions being asked. I mean, like, so do you pat yourself on the back? I would, privately.
So I think last week, during the parliamentary hearings, is when it became very real that everything that had been happening was because of our reports. So even though the story has been broken by us, and obviously other media houses have taken it on as well, it became very real last week when I saw that, okay, this was actually the product of our hard work and something is actually being done about it. And now we see that he, as well as his accomplice, have been apprehended.
Absolutely, and I mean, and that ultimately is being sparked off by what you guys have done, and that's a good example of just championing great causes. Daniel Steyn, let me bring you in. I mean, so you joined in a few months later, I understand. At what point and why on this project?
Yeah, right. So, Marecia did the first two reports, which was the first one was in November, asking questions about the night of the fire. And then the second one was in January this year, after Marecia was leaked a report that indicated that the body found in the cell was dead before the fire broke out. And then because of those reports, we got more tip-offs from officials at the prison, inmates from the prison, and members of the public who also had encounters with Thabo Bester while he was in prison online. And that the workload increased to a point where it was important for me to join the project. And then we've been working together since then, following up on the hundreds of leads that we've been getting.
Yeah, and I mean, and here's the story. I mean, from point one, which is convicted murderer and rapist spends time in prison as he should be, to number two, which is the person died in prison. End of discussion. I mean, that has been turned on its head completely, right? So in your investigations, Daniel, in fact, both of you, but Daniel, I mean, you knew you were dealing with a potential massive hot potato here, because for this to be not true, that means he actually escaped, but somebody who died was not him. It had to mean, obviously, that others on the inside had to be involved. What was your state of mind, therefore, in tackling the story?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting kind of sorry. We trying to understand who Thabo Bester was or is, and his mindset and the crimes that he committed and why he committed them. Those questions were always in my mind from the start, and there's a point at which it felt unreal in a way, because we're dealing with characters of a crime thriller almost, but at the same time we know that they are real human beings who are at large. So there was an element of feeling a bit nervous and vulnerable, but it was at the same time it was a thrilling ride.
Yeah, it's like that's your calling. I mean, that's what you do as a journalist. You need to follow through on the story, but it's also fraught with danger. I mean, did you feel the same way, Marecia, in terms of like, this is my job, this is why I do what I do, but oh my goodness, what are we getting into?
Yes, there was definitely an element of concern regarding safety. I think, especially given the nature of the story. And obviously, there's only so much that we can also do just to ensure our safety. So I think from the start of the story last year in November and then again in January, the story hadn't really taken off at that stage. And by then it was also just me being a journalist reporting on a public interest story. But I think it's when it really took off in March when I think both me and Daniel just had to be a little bit more vigilant regarding our safety.
And that point when it took off is, just get it clear, is when you guys reported that actually we think or we know that that Thabo Bester did not die in prison. Is that right?
Yeah, so we published on, I think, the 15th of March, so it's a little over a month now. We published the evidence that we have that suggests that Thabo Bester escaped, and we weren't entirely sure. We were pretty convinced, but there was still a niggling suspicion that we might be wrong. So we didn't, in our headline, we asked the question: Did Thabo Bester escape? We didn't say it for sure. But then the next morning, we got called by someone who had taken a picture of Dr. Nandipa and Thabo Bester shopping in Woolworths about a month after the fire, and we were able to verify that picture and to the best of our ability say that it is Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandipa in that picture. And that's when it really blew up, and the story was trending on Twitter for 3 weeks, and it all got a bit much.
Yeah. At that stage, I mean, Marecia, you thought what when it was like confirmed to say, oh my goodness, our hunches are correct. We've got some evidence, but now we've got pictures, and it's been time dated. So like he had to be alive shopping in Sandton City or at Woolworths or whatever, right? Goodness, what did you think at that time, Marecia?
I was just completely shocked because just as Daniel said, although we had all of this evidence that he most definitely escaped, I think we still needed that confirmation that he was in fact alive. And I think when we got that picture, it was almost just dead certain that this man had certainly escaped and that he was very much alive. And just seeing how the story took off on social media and seeing a lot more of the public being interested in the story, it was quite a surreal experience for us.
And you also said earlier on, Marecia, that now there was some concern for your safety because it's now, I mean, there are always people who don't want the truth to be told. I mean, I think the reasons are pretty obvious, right? To what level was that concern for your safety then and even now?
You cut off there a bit at the start of your question, but I think I got the most of your question. I think in thinking about our safety, one has to kind of think what would be the rationale to intimidate us or even worse. And I think luckily in South Africa, journalists are relatively safe. There haven't been any known kind of deliberate assassinations of journalists in our country, of investigative journalists at least, since '94. So it's already unlikely, but I think one has to think what would the rationale be, and on one way it would be to silence us, but we've now written the story, it's out there, the rest of the media have joined on board. There's just too many people looking everywhere that it wouldn't do any good to execute one of us. They would just it would actually just do more harm than good for the people. So I think that's what's been comforting us, is that idea. Yeah.
And I think that's a good point. I mean, the cat's out of the bag, and now it's like G4S and everybody else, and correctional services, and goodness, everybody else is accountable. It's a good point. What has it done for both of you? Let me start with you, Marecia, in terms of like you as a person, you as in your career, like what has it done for you now?
I think it's definitely put my name out there because after the story had broken out, both me and Daniel received quite a lot of requests for interviews and people just wanting to chat about the story. So career-wise, I think that it's definitely aided in, like I said, putting my name on the map. But I think even from a social perspective, just a lot more people seeming to recognize me, because I am somewhat of a private person. So that was quite a shift in how I usually go about things. So it's definitely been something that has made my name a lot more noticeable.
Okay, my suggestion: get used to it. I'm just saying, right? Daniel, what about you?
Yeah, I think I agree with Marecia. We've obviously this comes with a lot of opportunities, which we're very grateful for. I think we're counting our blessings in a way, because we wouldn't have been able to tell this story if it weren't for reliable sources who gave us information. And at the end of the day, we're indebted to them. And it feels a bit weird self-congratulating while for a story that is so serious and of a man who had so many victims and did so many horrific things. But yes, it's opening up opportunities for us. We're both quite early in our career as journalists, and it's quite unreal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, great that you do so. Just quickly, I mean, two things. And maybe Marecia, with you first, in terms of Ground Up, the support that Ground Up has given to you in delivering the story, with all it being fraught with danger. What can you tell us about that?
So with every report that comes out, there is an entire team working on it and assisting us with the write-up of it before it gets published and it's put in the public domain. So that is just one of the things that I've been very grateful for throughout this experience, even where my safety has been concerned. Ground Up has been incredibly helpful and incredibly supportive throughout this journey, from the end of October last year, when we were sort of just starting out with our investigations, and even now still, after the story has already broken and a lot more other media houses are on it, Ground Up is still offering that support.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think two things as we wrap up. It's pretty obvious to both of you that often journalists get tarnished with a bad reputation about sensationalism. But here's a good example of journalists doing what they do in response to Thabo Bester and Nandipa doing what they did, and maybe the father allegedly doing what he did, and many other people. So you doing what you had to do as citizens, upholding the very best standards in our country. I think for that we need to be grateful. I certainly am grateful, because that's very, very champion. That's very champion-like. Perhaps it just leaves me with a last thought to both of you, and just to comment on the role of a journalist. I mean, Daniel, maybe just first up with you, just your role as a journalist covering this type of stories that you do.
Yeah, I think journalists play a vital role in South Africa, and I think we're very lucky to have a media that is relatively ethical in the way it does things, relatively truthful, more so than in other countries like America, and so like where the media has become a dividing force. I think in South Africa it's actually a uniting force. Everyone more or less gets united behind the problems in society that's exposed by the media. And I hope that in exposing problems and pointing fingers, we're not just dampening the national mood, but also inspiring people to find solutions.
I think so. Someone said this gives South Africa a bad reputation. I said no. In fact, it gives a good reputation. How the role of our media can actually hold people to account, which I think is formidable. Marecia, your final thoughts again. That role of your role and the role of the media.
Yes. At the end of the day, we are public servants, and even though the focus is sometimes just to get stories out there for people to become aware of what's happening in their surroundings, it is also still our job to hold the relevant authorities to account on promises that they've made and responsibilities that they do have, as people do tend to remind us that the media is the fourth estate, so I think even with this Thabo Bester story, just seeing how once the story was out in the public domain, how members of the public also aided in sharing information, and now we see how that has actually led to him being arrested. So I think that the role that the media has played is somewhat of a relational one, where we are assisting the public, but the public is also assisting us.
Absolutely. In public service, and I think that's most admirable. Well, let me leave it at that, accepting saying that, from where I sit at Champion South Africa, we constantly look out for people who champion great causes. And I think this has been a great cause, because you need to have champion journalists as a stepping stone to building a champion nation. And to pick up on that point that you said before, where someone spotted Nandipar and Thabo Bester at Sandton City or wherever they were. Well, they were spotted in terms of the pictures. Well, let me tell both of you guys that my role as the champion spotter is to spot you guys, and both of you, well, you guys have been champion spotted. So well done to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's leave it at that. Appreciate your time. Lots more in your careers. I'll look out for that. Well, there you are. That's the type of champions we need to be talking about. What a privilege to do some champion spotting on this show. Right. I think that's it. That's it for today's show. In fact, we'll do it again tomorrow when we have 3 days left for the shows. I'm losing track of how many days to go. 3 days left for to potentially Eid al-Fitr, and that means the show as well. Until tomorrow then, Assalamu alaikum.